My study is on the examination of teacher certification patterns across 8 metro Atlanta school districts from 2017 to 2024. I specifically wanted to examine how professional and provisional teacher certifications are distributed across 8 school districts and how institutional norms, labor market dynamics, and policy factors shape the district staffing decisions. Well, teacher shortages have been an ongoing challenge now for years across all of America, but the reliance on provisional certifications is not uniform. Then, if we think about back in March of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic created a historic shock in the certification waivers and labor market instability throughout the United States. Specifically, when looking at Georgia, the Professional Standards Commission responded to this by relaxing certification requirements. For example, they provided a 1 year extension on almost all waiver certifications in order to allow for more flexibility. However, some of these districts still did not respond uniformly. So, by analyzing district level patterns, it can help us understand the inequities and institutional responses in the staffing choices made. The research showed that teacher shortages are highly localized. They're shaped by district demographics, compensation structures, turnover patterns, and policy environments. Recent studies conceptualize districts as independent labor market systems, and that would help explain why some districts faced chronic shortages while others remained relatively stable throughout all this. Multiple mixed method studies, specifically for Georgia, focused on highlighting these structural inequities, like provisional certifications are highly concentrated in majority Black demographic districts and low income districts, which makes both a staffing mechanism and a signal of labor market strain. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic only intensified these dynamics because the temporary policy waivers allowed districts flexibility, but the adoption of these flexibilities varied very widely across all these districts. And so, due to this uneven response, it highlights the need for a theoretical framework that would be able to integrate institutional norms, labor market pressures, and equity considerations. As a result, I ended up drawing on three interrelated frameworks that would guide my interpretation of staffing behaviors throughout these metro Atlanta districts. First, the neo institutional theory, which would explain that districts do not make staffing decisions purely based on efficiency or need. Instead, districts would operate within established routines, professional norms, and pressures from state policy, accreditation bodies, public expectations. This theory would help explain why certification patterns often remain stable even when the conditions change, and why some districts mimic each other while others deter on like their own institutional path. The labor market theory considers a broader dynamics of teacher supply and demand, such as districts face different levels of turnover, competition, and applicant pools. So even within the same region, their capacity to hire fully certified teachers still varies. This lens would help to explain why some districts experience persistent shortages and turn to provisional certification as a structural response rather than like a ad hoc decision. Lastly, the equity lens highlights the consequences of all these different staffing patterns. Since provisional teachers are often disproportionately assigned to schools that serve in higher needs students, variations in hiring practices may translate directly into unequal access to certified and experienced educators. So, altogether, these three frameworks provide a lens for how I'm going to interpret the patterns observed from the data and to help explain not just what the districts do, but why their responses diverge, even when they operate under identical state policies and labor market conditions. Here are my research questions that guide my study. I chose these because they would help me systematically investigate these patterns. I wanted to assess the variation in certification types, so provisional or professional, across 8 districts and 7 years. I also wanted to examine how the pandemic disrupted these certification patterns. Lastly, I wanted to identify the districts whose provisional hiring significantly deviated from what we would expect given the local conditions at the time. So the methods. To address all those research questions we just looked at, I used data from the Georgia Governor's Office of Student Achievement, specifically the Certified Personnel Information Dataset, which provides annually reported counts of certified personnel for all 181 public school districts in Georgia. However, given what I wanted to focus on, my study is going to be on the organizational response in a large, diverse metropolitan labor market. I decided to go with Atlanta, Cherokee, Clayton County, Cobb County, DeKalb County, Forsyth, Fulton, and Gwinnett County as the 8 Metro Atlanta city districts. Each district is going to be treated as an independent group. So the chi-square test of homogeneity assessed whether the distribution of certification types were proportionate across districts or whether those patterns divergence existed. The effect sizes are going to be quantified using Cramer's V, and adjusted residuals are going to help identify which districts contributed most to the observed differences. This would allow me to get year-by-year assessments on how the districts maintained, adapted, or even departed from the established staffing norms, especially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is serving as an exogenous institutional shock. So in order to create the figure you see here in figure 1, which shows the percentage of provisional teacher certifications by district over time, I first ran a series of contingency tables for each academic year in SPSS. These tables calculated the proportion of provisional versus professional certifications within each district. I then used those proportions to plot the trend lines that we see here in this figure to be able to show you how provisional staffing changed across the districts and the years. You can see here that there is a notable heterogeneity both within and between the districts. For example, Clayton County consistently shows a highest proportion of provisionally certified teachers, ranging from about 8% in 2017-2018 school year and increasing all the way to about 13% in 2023-2024. Atlanta also shows a relatively high proportion as it goes from about around 5% to about 10%. Whereas you can see districts such as Cherokee, Cobb, Forsyth, they display persistently low provisional percentages that seem to be generally below about 4% throughout most of the period. A very pronounced anomaly did occur in 2019-2020 school year, as you can see here, when all the districts exhibited a sharp decline in the provisional percentages. This decrease would correspond temporarily to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related district-level hiring freeze. And this was during which schools largely just stopped onboarding new teachers, which resulted in a minimal issuance of provisional certifications altogether. Then following this period, so 2020, 2021, you can see a substantial rebound in the provisional percentages across most districts. This would reflect both the resuming of hiring and the implementation of the temporary policy waivers that allowed for flexibility by the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. And then, of course, over the next subsequent years, you can see divergent trends emerge. So it looks to be Clayton, Atlanta, and Gwinnett County exhibited continued increases, whereas Cobb and Cherokee remained relatively stable. This divergence would indicate that post-pandemic staffing responses still were not uniform, with local labor market conditions and institutional practices shaping those district-level outcomes. Here you can see this table. It shows the results of a series of chi-square tests of homogeneity, which were conducted separately for each school year to examine whether teacher certification type distributions differed across all the 8 metro Atlanta districts each year from 2017 all the way to 2023. And every year, the chi-square statistic was significant, which confirms a non-random association between district and certification type. Then the Cramer's V indicates that while the associations are generally small, they are very meaningful. And that you can see on the chi-square table, so table 3, that the values for Cramer's V ranged from about 0.49, which is very small, in 2019-2020, to about 0.139, which is about small to moderate in 2023-2024. This would suggest that although the chi-square tests are highly significant, partly due to the sample size being so large, that the strength of the association between the district and the certification type is modest. You can notice here on the figure 2 that the 2019-2020 has the lowest Cramer's V, which aligns with the COVID-19 hiring freeze, which temporarily reduced all the provisional certifications across all the districts. And then in 2023-2024, you see the largest divergence, suggesting that the districts have returned to the differentiated staffing strategies post-pandemic, though. Overall, these results confirm that the district level staffing is heterogeneous and that provisional certification is an important lens for being able to understand the inequities and organizational responses to these labor market shocks. Lastly is the adjusted residuals, which is table 4. This table shows the adjusted residuals for provisional teachers across the district from the SPSS contingency tables. Clayton and DeKalb County consistently had high positive residuals, indicating they are hiring more provisional teachers than expected, which likely addresses a persistent staffing shortage. Whereas the Atlanta public schools also show a spike during the pandemic, reflecting emergency staffing adaptations possibly. Then you have Cherokee, Cobb, and Forsyth counties that have large negative residuals, suggesting fewer provisional teachers than expected, which could signal either strong access to fully certified teachers or maybe even more conservative staffing practices. Most notably is Gwinnett County, which is at the very bottom of table 4. It shifts from a negative to a very strongly positive residuals in the last 2 years, indicating a post-pandemic increase in reliance on the provisional pathways towards teacher certification. Altogether, these patterns reinforce that staffing inequities are both district-specific and dynamically shaped by labor market pressures and institutional responses over time. Altogether, all of these statistical analyses that were run show that teacher certification patterns were not uniform across the districts. The chi-square test confirmed that the association between school district and teacher certification type is highly significant. The adjusted residuals revealed which districts drove that association. So Clayton, Gwinnett, DeKalb, and Atlanta City Public Schools frequently exceeded the expected provisional counts, compared to Cherokee, Forsyth, and Cobb, which consistently fell below the expectations. The temporal trends suggest that some districts, such as Gwinnett County and Clayton County, are increasingly relying on provisional teachers compared to counties such as Cherokee and Forsyth, which maintain consistently low provisional staffing. Altogether, these patterns reflect the influence of district-specific resource constraints, local organizational logics, and response to policy environments, consistent with the theoretical framework I explained earlier. Some implications of these findings in terms of practice policy and even future research. So first, districts with persistently high proportions of provisional teachers like Clayton, Gwinnett, DeKalb, Atlanta, they may benefit from targeted recruitment and retention strategies to ensure that they have a full qualified staffing. Professional development programs, mentoring, and support for those provisional teachers could help maintain instructional quality while also addressing the staffing shortages. Second, policy interventions can't be a one size fits all. Instead, they should consider district level resources, local norms, organizational priorities, as the results show systematic inter-district variation. Lastly, longitudinal monitoring of provisional staffing patterns can provide early warnings of potential workforce instability. Therefore, future research, I think, could explore the mechanisms that link policy environments, resource availability, and district staffing behavior to better inform both the theory and the practice altogether. In conclusion, the provisional teacher distribution varies across districts and over time. Districts like Clayton County, DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, and the Atlanta City Public Schools consistently showed higher provisional rates, reflecting possibly urban growth pressures and labor market constraints, compared to Cherokee County and Forsyth County, which consistently maintained a stable, low provisional staffing certification type, which could possibly likely be due to stronger resource bases and different organizational logics. These findings all align with the three interrelated theoretical frameworks, such as the neo-institutional theory, which helped to explain how the shared policy expectations shaped the staffing norms. The institutional logics perspective highlighted how the districts interpret and prioritize those norms differently. And then the resource dependency theory can emphasize the influence of staffing resources and the constraints on district decisions. In practice, this suggests the need for targeted recruitment, retention, and support of these strategies. And in all, these insights suggest that policymakers and district leaders should tailor interventions to district context to be able to ensure equitable access to certified teaching staff, all while acknowledging the structural and organizational constraints.